Things are going really great. Yes, we're very pleased. 2,239 paddlers, a huge increase on last year, 600 odd, nearly 700 more than last year, and we look forward to staging a good race.
We've been involved probably over the last 10 years as a major sponsor of the Dusi. We've supported their development program in the valley, and that's borne some fruit. We in fact match the contributions that they make to the valley development program, and more recently we've been a major sponsor in the actual race itself, rather than just supporting their development program.
Well, it's a very prestigious event, and Powerade is very proud to be associated with it. Also, the fact that it is an endurance event that requires the replenishment that Powerade provides is very important strategically for the brand. We also get very good exposure. It's a very well covered event, so we do get good return from our association.
This millennium year, the race celebrates its 49th anniversary, and from humble beginnings by a pioneering Ian Player in the early 50s, the race has grown considerably. But then, judging from these pictures, so is Durban and the Blue Lagoon area too. In 51 and 52, Player took no less than 6 days to complete the event. Today, it takes 8 hours.
The previous record for the hazardous 110-mile journey down the Dusi and Umgeni rivers. With only 1 hour's sleep on the way, they arrived tired but triumphant, 2 hours ahead of their nearest rivals.
Exactly 49 years ago, when this race first was the brainchild, it was the brainchild of the two gentlemen on my left, Dr. Ian Player and Fred Schmidt. Dr. Player, Mr. Schmidt, nice to see you with us again.
Very good to be here.
Looking at the way it's developed, did you ever think when you had this idea it was going to end up in the biggest K1 and K2 race in the world?
Well, I knew that it was going to grow. It was inevitable because it was between two cities. However, the one thing that I'm really pleased about it is a sport that brings an environmental awareness. So for that, I'm very grateful to the great Nkulunkulu.
Fred, did you think you'd ever see it looking like it is today?
No, I had no idea. Actually, I entered just to get rid of some energy.
Did it work?
Yes, it worked.
And looking at the river and the way it's developed, are you a little sorry that you're not in a canoe today at the start of all of this again, Dr. Player?
Well, if I've been telling Fred for the last 10 years that when he's prepared to go with me, I'll go. But he tells me that I look old, but when we're walking down the road this morning, he wants to hang on to me.
So there's the challenge. Will we ever see you two in a boat together again next year?
We might, but I was telling Ian we'll have difficulty in stowing his walking sticks.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Indeed, the route through some of the most inhospitable terrain in KwaZulu-Natal. It starts off in Pietermaritzburg, and after 40 kilometers, with almost half of that with a canoe on your shoulder, the finish is just before the Dusi Bridge. Day 2 sports several portages downriver to the Inanda Dam, and Day 3, thankfully the shortest of them all, but the agonizing question remains, over or around Burma Road.
Welcome to the start of the 2000 Powerade Dusi Canoe Marathon, the 49th edition of this great race, and with this edition it becomes the biggest K1 and K2 event of its kind in the world. K1 and K2, well, K1 is one man in the boat, and this year it's a K2, so 2 men to the water per boat, and it's going to be a very, very interesting race indeed. This year, with the massive amount of water and flooding that's been down here and up country, there's differing water conditions, and the first day is all about picking the right lines and making the right decisions at the right times. This year, for the first time ever, there's talk and thinking that the race may go right down to the wire at the end on Day 3 at Blue Lagoon. However, from the fish and chips point of view, this year I'm taking part, and I can tell you what, if there are 2,300 other paddlers feeling as nervous as what I am, then I'm praying for all of them. However, we look forward to a fine 2000 edition of the Powerade Dusi Canoe Marathon.
So Day 1 starts off at the Natal Canoe Club headquarters at Campsdrift in Pietermaritzburg. Ernie Pierswear awaits just a few minutes after the start, and then it's on to several difficult rapids and the fearsome Campbell's Portage, which is almost 6 kilometers long and asks all the questions. But then that's the story of Day 1 in the Powerade Dusi. It asks all the questions. To describe the Dusi start to you as a competitor is to explain to you that the butterflies are rampant. Sweaty palms and an elevated heart rate is guaranteed. But most of all, the fear of the unknown plays with your mind. However, for the seasoned top contenders, their first objective was to get away cleanly and to get to the Ernie Pierswear first in line. Otherwise, your competitors could get away from you.
looking at standing conditions, the river's just above medium level. It's not high. You'll be able to get through everything. It's flowing really well, a nice safe level. The water looks really clean, and I think the weather's going to be kind to the guys till about midday, so everything's looking really good for an outstanding race.
This year produced the biggest ever women's entry with more than 200 paddlers lining up. In the field were the defending and two-time champions Debbie White and Wendy Jo McKay, formerly Witten, but they would for the first time ever have a real battle on their hands. Or should that be paddles? For the top men at the front who had started in the first batch, the water was choppy and churned up as front runners turned it over as quickly as they could. In the 49th edition of the race, there were more than 7 K2 pairs who were in with a chance of winning and getting out front and staying there to stamp down authority or what one or two teams had in mind. The first big obstacle is the Ernie Pierce Weir, a fish wrap built a few years ago, and it's a 5-meter drop. It holds fear, not only for the back of the field paddlers, but the men at the front know that caution is the watchword down here for starters. It was Follow My Leader, first through and doing a great job with young lions Len Jenkins and Brett Irvin, followed by defending champions Kelby Murray and Ant Stott. Third, fourth and fifth followed suit, and then came the danger combination. 1997 singles champion Mark Perro teamed up with 1999 singles champ Martin Dreyer. The women's field had quickly sorted itself out, and as expected, the other race favourites, Jeanette Walder and international paddler Antje Malherbe, were in the lead going over and down the Pierce Weir, and looking very comfortable, wearing the mantle of race leaders. However, a little later in the day, the men and women further back found out just why the weir is so fickle. One moment you're upright and going beautifully, and the next you're wet, your partner's wet, and the boat has to be emptied out too. Someone whose fate this was not was former Miss South Africa, the leggy Peggy Sue Kamaru. Her pilot surf ski world champion Oscar Chalupsky was doing a great job, but then Oscar has always made us believe that he was rather superhuman.
I'm a people's person and I can speak, Zulu, so it will be great. I'm back at home. I'm from KwaZulu-Natal, so I can relate to the people, and I'm going to get them out there to cheer us and carry our canoe, and just to meet them. It will be wonderful because they are our audience.
Commercial Road, where the men's leaders gingerly and cautiously tiptoed their way through, and with the water level mid to low on day one, the lines that the drivers were taking was of the utmost importance. One slight wrong entry and the flimsy canoe spills out its contents, and a swim at this early stage could cost you lots of time and lots of places. Here, for the first time, the different options are exercised. If you believe that you're better suited to running around the rapid rather than taking it on and falling out, then you steer left and take out to run around Commercial Road Weir. This is indeed the first indication of which teams fancy themselves at which discipline, paddling or running. At this stage, after 6 kilometres, the marginal leaders were co-favourites and Maritzburg boys Murray and Stott, who were receiving massive cheers from the partisan crowd. Just behind them were Gavin Tarr and Dion Bruss, and then a smooth-looking and well-trained Perro and Dreyer in third, while Grant Wilson and Piers Cruikshank were right on their slip and applying the pressure. Fifth, and just a scant 7 seconds back, was the next Maritzburg combination of Ant Rowan and Warren Valentine. At the front of the huge women's field, the White Jo McKay combination had taken the lead and were demonstrating their considerable river strength and knowledge. They were closely followed by Walder and Malherbe, who are touted as fast flatwater paddlers, but clearly the Natal duo had the edge in the rough stuff. The first significant portage of the day for the front men at the sewage farm, it was the 1998 champions Kelby Murray and Ant Stott who were enjoying a slender lead over Bruss and Tarr. They in turn were just a few ticks ahead of the clock of the men in third place. However, from the air it was clear that there really was nothing in it, and surprisingly, after all the talk, the start was not as maddeningly fast as everyone had predicted. at Commercial Road, where the largest ever entry list for a K1 and K2 race in the world was beginning to arrive. And arrive they did, in glamorous and then not so glamorous fashion. Hey, I paid for that boat. Hold on to it. Careful, careful, careful. Oops. Up front and almost 30 minutes ahead, the leaders were taking out at the first big portage of the day, Bishopstow. Once you've taken yourself and the boat up this huge bank, there's a tough uphill lying in wait. Keep in mind that the canoe weighs almost 20 kilograms, and it's not exactly the easiest thing in the whole world to get a grip on. Bruss and Tar were taking an energy-conserving tactic up the hill, and Pero and Dreyer were keying off them. Dreyer is without doubt the fastest man in the race on foot, and his partner's running had improved after an extensive road running, track and hill program, and they were biding their time. Eventually, with a whole gaggle of seconds in tow, it was Bruss and Tar crested the hill first, followed closely by Pero and Dreyer. Teenager Len Jenkins Jr. and his partner Brett Irvine, Murray and Stott were shadowing them determinedly. That's Ant Stott getting a helping hand and a word from a second. And that's Kelby Murray getting the other word. Remember, at this stage, none of these teams knew who were in the lead. Kevin White and Jabu Leslie had taken out at low-level bridge. That made an additional 4 kilometers of running, and no one knew how far the Maritzburg team could get ahead. The lead, however, was being stretched by Bruss, Tar and Jenkins and Irvin had been dropped, and after almost an hour of racing, it was down to the two pre-race favourites, Pero and Dreyer, and local lads, Murray and Stott. Racing down and holding the tight line next to the cattle fence were Murray and Stott, while Pero and Dreyer chose the unmowed and uneven line cutting back to the river on a shorter route. Mark Pero, why that option?
We had tripped the river on the Sunday before, and it looked like a more direct, faster line than the conventional route down the left. And Martin was very keen for us to try this and to try and get a gap on Kelby and Ant at this stage of the race.
And now here, two mishaps in this shorter route of yours. One fairly serious fall there. What was that like?
Not very pleasant for both Martin and I. I went down not too badly on that one, but the boat bounces on Martin's shoulder, and it's very unpleasant for him.
Finally making their way down to the river crossing. And then with that fall, Gauteng's men and the shorter line they took made that they had to backtrack as well. This tactic was fraught with danger. Pero and Dreyer kept running. Murray and Stott were on the other side already. And then in just a matter of a few seconds, Pero and Dreyer with their great running had caught up again. Right on the heels of the Maritzburg duo. But then yet another fall by Pero, and clearly it meant that Dreyer was pushing him to his limit and beyond. Pero and Dreyer approaching and going through Campbell's checkpoint with the younger crew chasing hard, but there was drama for Murray, who twisted his ankle quite badly, and that would play a role. Mark, a crucial point of the race here.
Yes, this is if your running's not strong at this point, you can get in and paddle. You've got to paddle through Tegwan and Son of a Gun Rapid, or you can go for the more conservative option and the slightly quicker run option of going for the hole-in-the-wall portage. It's about 30 to 40 seconds quicker if you run it hard.
Pero and Dreyer, however, were taking no prisoners. Their put in here spoke of professionalism and fine tooth-comb preparation. They'd been spending the last 5 weeks training on the river and knew the conditions inside out. And now, almost halfway into day one, it was showing. Quick succession, Jenkins and Irvin, Murray and Stott and Bruss and Tar arrived at the put-in, but the steam train that was Pero and Dreyer at the front were moving away. The interior of KwaZulu-Natal is awesome in its beauty, but its raw humidity and energy-sapping heat makes a huge impression on you, even when comfortably seated on a porch somewhere. When you're running with a boat on your shoulder and being chased by 2,000 other paddlers in 40-degree heat, the pressure is really on. But Pero, a 34-year-old fiberglass distributing company director, and Drea, a 31-year-old boat builder, could hardly notice. At the murderous Guinea fowl portage, they'd blown holes in the other competitors' tactics and were well and truly on their way, and they were on record pace to boot. Mission Rapids were lying in wait, and one can take nothing for granted on the Dusi River with its treacherous river bends, rocks and fast-flowing currents as well as confusing channels. On the way now to the Finger Neck portage, the leaders were under the scrutiny of a large media contingent as well as many spectators, but they sailed through here without as much as a sideways glance or a wave. Tar, an established river campaigner with Brus, yet another fine South African whitewater paddler, were chasing hard but were more than a minute behind and were being pushed by the younger duo of Jenkins and Irvin. Jenkins celebrated his 18th birthday this year and is being touted as a potential K1 winner in the near future. Just behind the two eager youngsters was another of the Gauteng combinations that had an eye on the top five. Grant Wilson from Victoria Lake Club and Piers Cruikshanks in Wits colours had quietly worked their way up into the top five, and even though they'd taken a slightly longer line here, were making sure that Jenkins and Irvin were applying themselves at all times. Sixth place was filled by an interesting combination, that of the bearded Roy Pepper and former Ironman champion Brandon Collier. Completely oblivious to the human toiling going on in the pursuit of a finisher's medal in the 2000 Powerade Dusi, this Zulu woman was carefully toiling her field for the next year's crop. But her disinterest was the exception rather than the rule. The people of the valley have welcomed the canoeists with open arms. Talking about welcomes, Pero and Drea never let up and were welcomed by a clock that read out a new record time to them after their first day at work. They celebrated with a fine finish and a handshake, and well they might have celebrated. Once Len Jenkins Jr. and his partner Brett Irvin appeared, the clock had ticked over to indicate that the leading duo were enjoying a 5-minute and 27-second lead. Gavin Tarr and Dion Brus were just a further 4 seconds back.
Everything went according to plan. We got lucky, a lot of lucky breaks. Our main opposition, Anton Kelby, took a swim going around Sewage Farm. Very unlucky for them, they'd broken away. We were struggling a little bit, about 40 seconds down on them, and that swim just allowed us to close the gap, and then we paced ourselves off them, and all of a sudden we found ourselves in the lead without really pushing too hard, and then the gap just seemed to open all on its own.
Martin, from there it was very much plain sailing. Nothing spectacular?
Nothing spectacular. We just kept chatting to each other, saying 80%, nothing more, and until mission, and then we said that we would open it up, and then we picked up the pace steadily, and it felt good.
The women's finish was a much tighter affair, and when Debbie Jermica and Wendy White crossed the line at Dusi Bridge and looked back, Jeanette Walder and Antje Malherbe were just 1 second in arrears, the closest margin in a women's race in several years on the river. After day one's trials and tribulations from Campsdrift to the Dusi Bridge, Pero and Drea were enjoying that 5-minute lead, while the next 4 places were covered by just 78 seconds. In the women's race, there was nothing in it, but one small tick from the second hand between Jermica and White and Walder and Malherbe. The Powerade Dusi has had a great effect in the valley, but none as profound as the many youngsters from this part of KwaZulu-Natal who are now taking to canoeing. Former Ironman competitor and pioneer in development, Robert Lambete.
Starting 4 years' time. I starting like that. I saw that people neglect them. It's slanging on a bank on a dam. I say, one time I'm coming down, just come coaching. He say, all right, must come if you find a time. Take 2 months, I find a couple boats, I buy a couple boats, let's go down. So starting coaching. But it's coming 15 one time, got 2 boats. Now it take a whole day to teach him.
We asked Robert how he selects his aspirant paddling students, and he came up with a systematic and very scientific system, a case of sink or swim.
The first time I say, you swim? I say, yeah, I swim. I say, must swim first before you sit in a boat. Jumping in the water, you swim. I say, okay, you pass one side. Each one. I say, everyone can swim because you stay for area, you got a dam, you got a river. I say, wonderful this place, I can coaching every time.
The start here of day 2 of the 2000 Powerade Dusi Canoe Marathon, and on the far bank just before the Dusi Bridge, it's Mark Perro together with his partner Martin Dreyer and the 2 leading women, first and second place as they go off. So Perro and Dreyer deciding to portage right from the word go during the start of day 2, going down to the Dusi Bridge because that can be quite treacherous, and they've decided to do the wise thing. The starter behind us there, John, working very hard now as elapsed time is the way that the start is handled now from day 2 onwards. Day 3 will be exactly the same. As for me and the celebrity race, well, there are some aches and pains I never knew I could experience. However, the big aches and pains were at the front of the field where Perro and Dreyer were enjoying an almost 6-minute lead, and on day 2, with the Inanda Dam ahead, they tried to preserve that lead.
Day 2 is probably the toughest day of the whole race and is another 40-kilometre haul. However, this day is dominated by Saddles Portage, the confluence of the Dusi and Umgeni rivers, then Gumeni Hill Portage, and finally a 12-kilometre paddle on the Inanda Dam, which really takes it out of you after a long day in the boat. Debbie Jo McKay.
I would like to say we'd be in the stronger position, but you can't tell until you get out there on the river and you see what happens, what the water's doing. So we just wait and see.
Lined up like giant pickup sticks, 2,000 canoes wait for their owners to put them through one more day of rigorous testing. But already, after just one day, the demanding river had taken its toll, and several competitors had either wrapped their boats around trees and rocks or suffered personal injury. Whether you're a front runner or a back marker, this race takes its toll. However, no one told Mark Perro and Martin Dreyer this. After the duo had portaged around the dam wall and the Dusi Bridge, they put in and went at it hammer and tongs. The intense 1992 Sprint Olympian was driving well, and his former salmon fisherman partner was taking it all in his stride. A more laid-back character than Dreyer you'd battle to find. The combination seemed to be working well. The same thing could be said for Joe McKay in white, who had won this title twice before and taken the paddling option around. Joe McKay won last year's singles event with 15 minutes to spare, while Antje Malherbe was third. This year it was a team effort, and the Natal couple were flying along beyond the bridge. Back at the top, the starter called on second and third place in the men's category to the line, and Jenkins and Irvine and Tar and Bruce were on their way to do battle on day 2. In one way, one thinks about this as probably a much better way to traverse this type of terrain, but there is just not as many medals or bragging rights up for grabs at the end of it all. On the way to conference, the chasing pair of Waldra and Malherbe had caught and passed the leaders, and the KwaZulu-Natal pair were riding off their wave. This gives one a distinct energy-saving advantage, and the local lasses were using it well. As for Perro and Dreyer on the first saddle portage, they were streaking away, and no matter how hard the chasers were applying themselves, they were not making an impression on the last 2 singles champions. These 2 men were comfortable with running at almost 4 minutes per kilometre, and their thorough preparation was paying off handsomely. In the middle of all that hard work over the Christmas period, they had made their base at beautiful Underberg, and even included a 100-kilometre paddle session and several punishing long runs. Everything they'd done in the previous 3 months was done with one thing in mind: to be victorious at the 49th Powerade Dusi Canoe Marathon, and everything was working out fine. Mark Perro, looking at these pictures and halfway through the race, were you at all sure that you'd had it sewn up by now?
A 5.5-minute lead is a very big lead and a very hard lead to try and chase down. We knew that we couldn't really be beaten at this point, but we could still throw the race away by taking a wrong option, breaking the boat and having to limp in. That was the biggest concern of ours.
Now the duo are on to making short work of the second saddle portage. Back at first saddle, second and third was being contested between Jenkins and Irvin and Tar and Bruce. While on the downside and getting to the put-in at the bottom, however, there was heartbreak for the women in second place. Antje Malherbe and her partner Jeanette Walder. They were working hard. After taking lead from Joe McKay and White, the pair were going strong when Malherbe, somewhere in this dense bush, overbalanced on her left ankle and fractured her foot. Unbelievably, she continued on, but this was all that the Natal combination needed to fire them up. They were quick to spot Malherbe's difficulty and put down the hammer. Walder dragging the boat along by herself, and with huge inner resolve and a pain threshold that was being tested to the limit, Malherbe, a celebrated international paddler, gritted her teeth and continued. But no doubt their challenge for the top spot was effectively over. Joe McKay and White were on their way. At the coming together of the Dusi and Umgeni Rivers Conference, the leaders were enjoying their 6-minute lead and still opening up daylight on the other challenges. This part of day 2 is very technical, and Ibis Point engaging where we're waiting to pounce on any wrong entry lines. At Gumtree, just below the conference, Pero and Drea were firing on all cylinders. Mark, there's another option here. Why use this one?
We knew this section really well. We had tripped it. It was the one section of the river I really felt confident with. There was a safer option, which is the portaging option, which would have been probably the better option for us. We couldn't make a mistake, but I knew that section so well, I wanted to give it a go.
So the approach to Washing Machine Rapid in with confidence, and again it was clear that the hours that they'd spent tripping on the river was now paying off. They knew exactly which lines to take and which currents to ride. Sometimes these top paddlers actually read the water like a top golf professional would read greens. However, you don't get quite as wet when you misread one at Augusta or St Andrews. They were a study in concentrated team effort and aggressive yet contained paddling. Willem's chute proved to be no hindrance, and their takeout to pass Ibis Point, that was also faultless. Mark working hard here and concentrating extremely hard on the right lines. Quite clearly very crucial to know exactly where you go.
This was a particularly dangerous point in the race for us. We had tripped it the day before just to make sure. We'd gone over this 15-minute section very carefully. Coming up to the takeout here, John and Adrian Edmonds actually had quite a nasty swim on one of their trips, and we were just trying to make sure that we didn't wrap the boat at this particular takeout.
So you were going tiptoeing and very cautious.
Very, very carefully. Right there, we were washed into those rocks on one of our trips and nearly wrapped our tripping boat. That last little move there was very tricky. At different water levels, you take different options. At that level, we couldn't paddle the whole way down. We were forced to take out and portage down the last bit of Willem's chute. It's still quicker than doing the conventional portage on the right-hand side. The other option is to run on the left-hand bank, and you take out at the Gumtree right on the top. It's about a 15-minute run, hard run, and you'd put in at Ibis Weir, just downstream.
And finally, for once, you ran away from Drea.
Yes, I really enjoyed that part.
Second place now belonged to another KwaZulu-Natal pairing, Gavin Tar and Dion Bruce. They'd got away from their younger provincial mates Jenkins and Irvine, but they had perhaps taken the wrong line into Ibis Point and paid for their little indiscretion, with the youngsters closing down on them rapidly. Perhaps a serious mistake here, Mark?
There's not too many options you've got. We went the left option, they've gone for the right option. The option they've gone for is slower. You can see them having to wade through that pool. Now, we tested that 3 or 4 times in our preparation, and we just found we lost too much time swimming through that particular pool, and it was quicker to go around the left. Jenkins and Irvin will be seeing them swimming around, and they'll be closing down that gap very quickly.
Well, that is exactly how it turned out, and the youngest coupling in this men's seniors race were working their way very gingerly down there too. Obviously know this condition very well and know how to make their way around here too. Talking about rapidly, on day 2 the conference and Washing Machine Rapids hold large terrors for the competitors who are further back. slowly. Hold it upright. I said upright, man. But for the locals, these waters hold no such terrors. This exercise can be repeated 100 times a day. That's if we can get away from school. Maybe not this time. For others, this was a rather wet experience, and man and canoe were tested severely. Where is reverse gear in this thing? Oh, there. Thanks for the help, mate. Now watch. This is how you do it. Up ahead, the leaders had now swapped positions, and the stockier Dreyer was pulling the boat down the backside of the tortuous Numeni hill. Pero, who does not exactly have the shortest stride length in the whole world, had to haul some seriously to keep up. This was impressive running from Martin, who until 2 years ago was a salmon fisherman in the Canadian waters. Mark, a hard time with Martin running as quickly as he does?
Yes, he's just such a strong runner. In training, we discovered that it was quicker for him to drag the boat on that particular section. Wherever it's steep enough, we try to let Martin drag the boat so I could recover on the portaging sections.
The put-in again was flawless, and everything was going right for the Gauteng man Pero and the racing machine from Neisner. In contrast, Jenkins and Irvin had caught up again at Gumtree, but were hard-pressed by the Tar and Bruce combination. And then, the former Maritzburg College students took the wrong line and almost caused serious damage to their boat. Tar and Bruce sped by while the younger men tried to rectify their mistake. And just a few minutes further back, Anstott was pulling their trademark quagga-striped canoe through the dense KwaZulu-Natal undergrowth with his partner nowhere in sight. After having treatment on his injured left ankle virtually throughout the night, Kelby Murray was having severe difficulty in walking, never mind running. But his desire to get the best out of his body, even in this scenario, was hard to ignore. Stott had always had their reputation as a strong young man, but this was quite unbelievable. He was sprinting as hard as he could with the boat, and his injured partner running as hard as he could. It was one of those special Dusi moments that demonstrates just how high the competitive flame burns. Another former winner, Kevin White, and his partner, Jabu Leslie, streaked by in their trademark green canoe, and nowhere is the old adage, horses for courses, demonstrated better than right here. 3 boats, 3 different lines. '85 singles winner John Edmonds and his younger brother Andrew here in 7th had a long swim at another treacherous rapid on day 2, Hippo Rapid. But after holding onto his paddle for dear life and finally collecting his hat, John was ready to do more battle with the Umgeni River and its two-faced rapids. But keep in mind on the second day that was not the paddler's only foe. The temperature had steadily risen and it was very humid and edging towards 40 degrees. The sun was taking no prisoners. Proving too that 4 legs can beat 2 arms and a paddle anytime, these guys thought that the grass was greener on the other side. And for a few seconds here, just after Hippo Rapid, Joe McKay and White were in trouble after the current turned their boat, and their struggle to right it and get away from the rapid itself makes one realize that this type of water flow just does not take no for an answer. The power at which the river flows is hard to believe until you have to fight against it with every sinew in your body. If the leaders had their small troubles, the women in second place, Walder and Malherbe, looked great in the water. But the moment that they had to put it back on terra firma, Malherbe's fractured left leg would make any good time on the run an impossibility. At this stage, she herself had not even been sure that it was broken, just that it was very, very painful. Finally, Pero and Dreyer were on the dam, the one stretch that Pero had been very worried about. Indeed, they were convinced that there were boats that could outkick them on the flat water. Mark, in the end, that didn't prove to be the true fact.
No, we were very strong on the dam. We had conserved right the way up until the dam, which was what our tactic was, just go nice and steady up until the dam. When we hit the flat waters of Ananda Dam, then we'd open up.
The two water warriors were enjoying a 9-minute lead and looked certain to nail down their second record in as many days. It was almost as if the unbearable 40-degree heat was non-existent. With this large lead, most of the pundits were happy to award the 2000 event to the likeable pair, and there was still one day to go. happy to see the end of day 2, Mr. Pero?
Yes, delighted to get to the finish. Martin actually missed his juice, and he raced the last hour on the flat waters of Ananda Dam without any liquid. So we needed to hydrate him straight after the race.
Young Jenkins Jr., his father, is a stalwart of the race, and his partner Brett Irvine eventually broke away to clinch the runner-up spot again. Third place was undecided right up to the line. Tar and Bruce were just ahead of Grant Wilson and Piers Cruikshank. Their aim was just to outkick Tar and Bruce, who had hung tough all day and didn't do much wrong either. In the end, the KwaZulu-Natal pair hung on for third. Stott and Murray put together the second fastest paddle of the day, and they headed 2 previous Dusi winners, Kevin White together with Jabu Leslie and John and Andrew Edmonds.
We went for the paddling option at Conference. We went and had a look yesterday, and we felt confident, saved our legs, and saved our legs for hopefully Burma Road Portage tomorrow. And eventually we were getting, the splits we were getting, we could see the gap started to open up from Saddles Portage.
A tired-looking Debbie Jermica and her partner Wendy White had made the most of their fine combination, and at the finish line, after the grueling 12 Ks on the flat water of the dam, they themselves had, for all intents and purposes, nailed down their third doubles Powerade Dusi title. They had stretched their advantage to no less than 17 minutes. Boulder and Malherbe, bad fortune nonetheless, kept batting away and got a pull from Colin Simpkins and the Underberg farmer Colin Wilson, who had placed 23rd overall. Jermica was very happy with their second day adventure.
As far as we know, Antje fell on first saddle and she sprained her ankle. So they were really slow over second saddle. That's where we got away from them. And then I don't know if they've had any other drama subsequent to that. But
okay, Wendy, and you kept the lead from then on and you just powered away.
Yeah, we made a bit of a meal of hippo, 3-course meal of it. But we managed to come through all right. We didn't have a swim, but we ended up portaging when we should have shot it. But everything else, we came through great. The water was superb. And, yeah, we both worked really hard across the dam. It was really mind stuff, but we'd done our homework and it was great.
So the top men with an almost unassailable lead, but then, as they reminded us all, this is the Dusi and anything can happen. But we were all asking if that would take 9 minutes. In the women's section, the top duo had also achieved what Pero and Drea had, practically nailed down the win with 1 more day to go. At the Ananda Dam at the second overnight stop, it seemed as if the moon was already shining its full congratulations down to the leading men and women. But there was also a lot of self-congratulations, and some guys even proved that their bite is worse than their bark.
Okay, next. Ja, is besig om te braai. Man het ons maar sy vleis en sy aardappels nodig. So ons het nou elke aand nog gebraai. Ons het pasta saamgebring, maar is nie sterk die pasta nie. Nee, as so dag se werk 'n stukkie vleis dan doen dit goed. So steakie en 'n choppie. Ons nou net die mielie saamgebring.
Girlfriend. This is not a girlfriend, this is a second. You see, there's a big difference.
Yes.
You leave the girlfriend at home and you bring a second. There's
Maar die een keer was er met de boot voor ons uitgevallen. Ons het het deurgekomen, maar we moesten stop. Ons moest breek in die rapids voor die man. We willen niet een man zeer gemaakt. Hij heeft genoeg aan zeer gemaakt in Natal.
And that comes from a doctor. For some, the day had been very long, and for others, it was going to be a very long night indeed.
The Eastern boys are free. The Eastern boys are happy and they go out on the spree. They never quarrel and they never disagree. 'Cause the motto of the Eastern boys is come and have a drink with me. Woo!
Hey, it's lekker. Would you like some?
You want to get a picture of his partner? Come on.
Je doet dit voor zo'n trend 5 krans.
Here at the start of day 3 of the 2000 Powerade Dusi Canoe Marathon, we thought it good to explain to you exactly what the paddlers, and now I can say us paddlers, wear. First off, I chose one of these rugby protectors to try and help with some of the damage that gets done to your shoulders when you run with a boat. So that goes on first. Then, secondly, you slip over the splash cover. Now, the splash cover is elasticized and it goes around the front of the boat, perhaps a little bit like that to give you an idea to keep the water out of the boat as you go through the rapids. Then you help yourself to one of these, which this year is compulsory, a life jacket, so that gets slipped on. Then, to make it an even tougher package, you have 2 trippers. Now, what you do is, with a very clever system of suction, you stick that into one of these and you get some of the sponsor's product in there. That holds 2 liters worth of liquid, so you can always have replenishment and stay decently hydrated as you go out there on the river. And then, just to wrap it all up in a very nice little package, you wear your race bib so that they can recognize you out there as an official paddler and a competitor in the 2000 Powerade Dusi Canoe Marathon. As far as shoes are concerned, the guys try to go for something fairly light because, as you can well imagine, they get absolutely soaked, so you want to wear something as light as possible because the shoes do get a little heavy. Talking about heavy, at the front of the field, competition was very heavy for the rest of them who were chasing Pero and Drea, and that was going to be the big story of day 3.
And without doubt the most technical of the days, and a large amount of water had been released from the dam so that the paddlers would have a nice exciting ride back to the Blue Lagoon in Durban. However, the big choice of the day is to decide to go over the feared Boma Road hill or to stay on the water and face falling out at the slightest mistake. The overnight stop was a buzz, and even if most of the paddlers weren't saying it, they were all thinking it. Just a little less than 30 k's to go now. For Antje Malherbe, that was a terrible thought, because her misfortune had indeed been confirmed at a hospital as a fracture, but with duct tape and socks as a wrapping on the cast, she was ready to go too. Again, the top contenders are set off on elapsed time in exactly the same start as what rally drivers would enjoy. Pero and Drea knew that they could just not make a mistake, and you could bet your last stop of Inanda Dam water that Joe McKay and White were enjoying the same thoughts. Mark, that's exactly what you were thinking as you got going on day 3?
All we wanted to do was just take conservative lines, get to Durban with a boat in one piece.
Nowhere than around the Inanda Dam is KwaZulu-Natal's inherent beauty more apparent. The region now enjoys a fine windfall from the Powerade Dusi Canoe Marathon, which amounts to almost 20 million rands worth of financial impact. At the dam takeout for Pero and Drea, one notes one more feature of their immaculate planning: their seconds, which included Dusi gold medalists and fine athletes in their own right. These men and women know what to do and when to do it, and this was just one more of the cogs that the pair had oiled and had in good working order. This is a compulsory portage, and Walder and Malherbe knew that this would be very hard for them. But Walder bravely picked up the boat and made good time up the hill, while Malherbe got as much help as she was allowed to have on her broken ankle. The majestic sights of the valley was inspirational, but Pero and Drea had their eyes on the sight of the sometimes raging torrent. There was lots of water at Top's Needle, and it was a case of eyes wide open as Pero and Drea gingerly made their way through it. They knew it was all a case of go easy and don't take chances, and they weren't taking any. No big moments here yet, Mark?
No, we took the conservative option. We put in halfway down, and we only shot the bottom half of Top's Needle, which is a very tricky rapid. It can break your boat very easily. A swim in Top's Needle and you are going to break your boat. So we just went conservatively and steadily.
Joe McKay and White were in exactly the same position, but the large rapids at Top's Needle, known as a boat breaker on this last day, they had no troubles like that, despite the hurried instructions from the driver. Jenkins and Irvine followed a slightly different line by staying left, and it was clear that they were trying as hard as they could, but there was heartache ahead for them too.
They shot Top's Needle from the top in an effort to close the gap on Martin and I.
Even with all their years' worth of experience, Tara and Bruce hit a rock very hard at Top's Needle, but luckily their craft suffered no damage. They got very lucky there.
Very lucky there. That little mistake could have put them out of the race.
The Gauteng pairing of Wilson and Cruikshank had said before the time that they would throw caution to the wind in an effort to grab a slice of third or even second, but they'd lost a little time on Bruce and Tar.
You actually see Grant looking back there. That's the point where he actually split the seam in his canoe.
The old warhorse and former winner John Edmonds and his brother Andrew were flying long. But if it's the last day of the Powerade Dusi, then you know that the Edmonds boys will be doing just that. They'd quietly worked themselves in with a chance of a top 5 place. At the Umzanyati Rapid, the line is always left, and the duo did what was required. For Pero and Dreyer, this was crunch time. They decided that they would take no unnecessary chances and they would run the dreaded Burma Road. It's a very big decision to make, and Mark, you were always worried about keeping up with Martin up the big hill.
Burma Road is the worst part of the whole race for me. I was terrified of going over. It's broken me, it's shattered me in previous years, and I really didn't want to go over. The fact that we had such a big lead, we had no option, we were forced to go over. I wasn't looking forward to it.
So for Mark Pero, a big worry, not because of his own pace, but the fearsome pace of his partner. And he'd been wondering about Burma for months. Now he would find out. Joe McKay and White were also pulling away even more, and they were just consolidating, seeing that their lead was almost a half an hour at this stage. They were also well under record time. The Burma takeout, the support team was there yet again, and Pero and Dreyer did not disappoint them. The machine that was this pairing just kept ticking along.
Right, here they come, ladies and gents.
11.5 minutes. Third place Star and Bruce, who were almost 12 minutes behind, would be elevated to second soon. There are several ways to negotiate the way around Burma, and these boats were proving it. The men in the top 6 were now well and truly battling it out, and those who chose to paddle round were doing it at risk. A small mistake can cost you a gold medal on this very technical part of day 3. The combinations of White and Leslie and the Edmonds brothers were on their way to the first big obstacle, Pump House Weirs, and they were throwing caution to the wind. But let's take you back to the early days when the thought of a 40,000 Rand first prize would have made the strictly amateur paddlers feel sick, and facilities weren't that great either. For that matter, nor was the form, eh?
We have a wonderful farm down to us, and the minute of that tailoring will not get us shooting the canoe because it was too hard for us.
An up steep hill. But at the finishing point in Durban, the crowd gave Willem van Meets and his brother...
These pictures bring to mind the great names of the Dusi: Pearson Templeton, Potgieter and Crawley, the Van der Ritz, and later the man who first brought the Dusi to the greater public's attention, 14-time champion and veterans winner this year, Graham Pope Ellis. Were it not for his efforts, it's even doubtful whether this program would have taken to the air. However, in the year 2000, the finish at the Blue Lagoon held more than 10,000 people, and they had all come out to see whether Pero and Dreyer could shatter the record set by Pero and his 1992 teammate Neil Evans. And they did that by a very healthy margin of almost 5 minutes, and breaking 8 hours in the process. Gavin Tarr and Dion Bruss flew the KwaZulu-Natal flag high and took second, albeit almost 14 minutes back. Then the finish for the bronze medal and a check worth 8,000 Rand, and there were 3 boats in with a chance for that third place. But it was Murray and Stott who outkicked the rest for the place on the podium.
Again, we conserved, went off slowly, carefully through the rapids, made a mistake at side shoot again, and then we had to go over Burma Road, which is a nightmare for me, and Martin just pushed me all the way, got to the top, he dragged the boat down to the bottom, I recovered, and then we paddled in strongly into Durban.
We just, like Mark said, we were just conservative till Burma, and then from there we pushed up the hill, actually got up there in 17:30, which I was quite surprised. We were hoping to do it in 20. And then from there it was just adrenaline that just kept us going. There's no holding back.
I don't know, it was always, as I said yesterday, it was always going to be a hard race. At no time today did we ever slacken off. I think we pulled the hardest we've ever pulled into Durban today, And yeah, we really put our heads down and we ground today. Like I say, at no stage did we ever slacken off or relax. Now's the only time to relax.
The final placings and the names Pero and Drea we believe will be up there a while with a dominating win and a record to boot. In a race with this type of standard, one can hardly believe that they had eked out a 13-minute win, but that just shows their complete dedication to perfection. Valda and Malherbe were almost 40 minutes back at the finish, and the women's race also delivered a new benchmark for the 2000s. That's my partner Jason Callister working extremely hard with yours truly. Lots of encouragement. That's Bruce Fordyce showing off the cameras like he normally does. And Oscar Chalupski with former Miss South Africa, Peggy Sue Kamalu. Mark, your most endearing memory of the 2000 Powerade Dusi Canoe Marathon?
Most definitely crossing the finish line at Blue Lagoon.
Well, for these men and women, crossing the finish line would also happen, but not quite as quickly as the combination of Pero and Drea. We'll be looking forward to the 2001 Powerade Dusi Canoe Marathon. So for Mark Pero, I'm Arnold Gertz saying, see you on the river.